Well, first of all, the idea of doing this is a new idea because Western society, for a long, long time, has thought, the oceans are great, they're fine, what are you worried about? We had a cornucopian view of things. Now, Thomas Huxley was no dope. He was a brilliant guy, but he didn't get oceans well enough to realize that the oceans are all too finite, all too vulnerable. And we started thinking about environmental consequences as a big way in American society in 1962. There was a marine biologist named Rachel Carson, and she wrote a book about pesticides, interestingly enough, and their consequences that absolutely shook my country and ramified around the world. But the amazing thing is the marine biologist wrote a book about the environment, but it wasn't the marine environment she was writing about. There was nothing in there about oceans. Oceans are fine. Why worry? Okay? Well, there we go. Here's why to worry. 7 years after Silent Spring came out, there was a humongous oil well blowout in the Santa Barbara Channel. It was a wake-up call. And the reason it was such a wake-up call is not because accidents hadn't happened before. Accidents happen in all sorts of industries and in all sorts of human endeavors. People don't always do it right. The reason it was important is because Santa Barbara, California is within an easy drive of Los Angeles, which is where the television industry was located in the United States, along with New York. And so when the oil started coming ashore and dead seabirds started washing ashore, television crews from LA drove to Santa Barbara and showed live or near live film that day on national TV. And the reaction was phenomenal. And the U.S. government fundamentally changed then. We passed most of our environmental legislation in the wake of the Santa Barbara oil spill. And yet, even in 1990, the United Nations said, the oceans, they're in okay shape. Don't worry about the oceans. They're fine. But let me tell you something. I started talking with a lot of really, really smart people, marine biologists and other ocean experts all around the world. And I pulled this book, can we go back? I pulled this book together. It was published in 1993. And it said something really, really radical. It said the oceans are in trouble. Who would have thunk it? The oceans are in trouble. The biggest ecosystem on the planet is in trouble. That is a wake-up call. We wanted to ram the message home, so I wrote something called Troubled Waters, a Call for Action, and it said the same thing. And more than 1,600 scientists from around the world signed it. We made the first news hit of the International Year of the Ocean in 1998 with the release of the statement. And it was unprecedented. The marine scientific community was saying the oceans are important, the oceans are trouble, and we have to act now. This is big stuff. So the question is, what are the threats? And what I realized is that there are two sets of threats. There are the proximate threats, okay, the near-term threats, and then there are the things underlying those proximate threats. And the near-term threats were we take more out of the oceans than the oceans can sustain. We physically damage them. We chemically alter them. We move species from one place to another, and we're changing the atmosphere in ways that affect the ocean. Those are the proximate threats, and they're ones, in some places, one is the dominant threat. In some places, it's another. Worldwide, there are patterns. We'll talk a little about those patterns. But they're all being driven by underlying forces. There are too many of us. We consume too much. We don't know enough. We don't care enough. And as a consequence, the institutions we have created thus far are not adequate to the task. They just can't cut it. They're not up to the challenge. So, what's the evidence? Well, here's one. My friends, Daniel Pauly and Ren Myers and Boris Worm, and many other scientists from Canada, the United States, around the world, have shown that the oceans were once full of life. They were once home to many more things and many bigger things than they are now. And there are things we used to be able to eat that are gone. We'll never see them again unless we change the way we're doing things. That's a really sobering thing. A great example of this comes from your country, and since it comes from the other coast, I think I can speak freely about it here without getting booed off the stage. Cod built Atlantic Canada just as it built the New England states of the U.S. You know, Cape Cod in Massachusetts. The cod is the state fish of Massachusetts. It's the state symbol. Well, it was even more so in Canada. Cod were being taken here in Atlantic Canada by the Basques around the time of Columbus. They came all the way across the Atlantic because the resource was so incredibly abundant. Unimaginable abundance. They drove the economy. Okay? In case you can't read that, it says codfish, Newfoundland currency. So basically, cod were dollars. That's a whale cod. I mean, that's an amazing fish. But something happened. You don't see that anymore. What happened? Well, as it turns out, the populations of cod, which had been exploited at the same level, more or less, for many, many decades, all of a sudden went up. And we overexploited them, and the fish populations and the fishing communities collapsed. How did it happen? Well, first it was foreign trawlers entering waters off the coast of Canada, and then we, Canadians, finished the job. And it's a remarkable collapse. It's probably the canonical one that's taught in fishery courses around the world. But it's not just in Canada that this kind of thing is happening. It's happening just about everywhere. And here are the numbers. And if these numbers don't get your attention, I don't know what will. About 80% of the world's fisheries are overfished or they're at capacity, which means only about 20% of them aren't yet overfished or about to be overfished. Now, that is a scary statistic. If you fish for a living, this is scary. If you fish for fun, this is scary. If you are concerned about seabirds or whales, this is scary. If you're concerned about the integrity of marine ecosystems, this is scary. We need to have oceans full of life for all our diverse needs. And as my buddy Ram showed, wherever you look in the world, you see the same population trend. That, by the way, looks like my stock portfolio. Yeah, it's my retirement fund there.